Hey YouTube, just figured I'd go ahead and do a quick story time of how I came to live in a van, how long I've been living in the van, and all that good stuff. Since, my name is Vanpunk, figure it's probably appropriate that I give some people a little backstory in case anybody ever finds this channel. Just so you all know, the reason I have this channel is just so that there's some record of me once I'm gone, because as you'll hear through this story, I've been on my deathbed twice, and I realized that I was leaving nothing behind and there'd be no record of my existence. I have no kids, have no family. So at this point, this is pretty much the only thing that proves that I ever existed. So might as well go ahead and get on with the story. In 2020, I was living in the woods behind a theater in Daytona. I was homeless, I had a couple of tents set up. I had a motorcycle, a Yamaha V-Star, that I would do food deliveries through Postmates on. And I was trying to save up a little bit of money so that I could hopefully get out of the woods and find a place to live. But with rent being, I think it was like $800 to rent a room at the time, that was getting pretty expensive, and I couldn't really justify the expense when I didn't have more than maybe $1,200 a month coming in. So I've been living in the woods. Well, first off, going back further, I was living in Las Vegas in 2019 when I had my identity stolen. And then a friend of mine that I hadn't spoken to in 10 years because I thought he was mad at me, turns out he just never bothered to look me up. We finally got reconnected, and when we did, he told me I could move in with him. He was living in Gainesville, Florida at the time. And so I got a U-Haul, moved back from Vegas, came back to Florida, a state that I swore I'd never step foot in again when I had moved. And within a day, his roommate said that he had not agreed to me living there and that I wasn't welcome and that I had to go. So after moving all the way across the country, I was out on the street within 2 days. The U-Haul had already been returned. I'd already unpacked everything, so I was basically screwed. So I came back to Ocala, Florida, which is about 40 miles south of Gainesville. It's the city that I grew up in, well known as the horse capital of the world. And basically started my couch surfing / homeless era. So after about 6 months to a year of bouncing around in different places, I ended up living in the woods behind the theater in Daytona. So a friend of mine from Ocala that I had stayed in her backyard previously during those couch surfing days, she contacted me one day and said that I could move back in to her backyard, that her mother would be happy to have me there. It was her mom's house. Her mom liked me a lot, and she knew that I was in a bad situation, so she's like, I'll come get you, we'll get all your stuff, and we'll move you back to Ocala. In Ocala, it was central to downtown, so I probably could have found a job. Within a week, I was a line cook for 20 years before I moved to Vegas and started doing Postmates, because out in Vegas, Postmates, when it first started, was great money. In a 24-hour city like Vegas, I could literally start at 10 p.m., work until 6 a.m., and make $100. So the day that she came to pick me up, we were supposed to go to my campsite to pick up my stuff first. She decided that she wanted to go to the beach first instead, which is the one decision that really shaped what the rest of my life will be. Had we gone to the campsite first, we wouldn't have been on the bridge when we were, but you can't do anything about that. So anyway, we're on the bridge leading into Ormond Beach, and we're on the downhill slope, and we're stuck in traffic. And a guy comes over the bridge. I don't know how fast he was going, but he was paying attention to his cell phone. Rear-ended the back of us. We were in a little Toyota RAV4, like an older model, so it was tin can. He ended up pushing us into the oncoming traffic, the westbound lane. We were in the eastbound. And a big Toyota, Tundra pickup truck, something like that, hit my side because I was in the passenger seat at about 40-45 miles an hour. We flipped over about 4 times. According to the medical report and the police report, I was still conscious because I was able to put pressure back on the paramedics' hand when they came up to cut me out of the wreckage, but I did need to be cut out and airlifted. And then I was placed in a medical coma. I would be in that coma for 4 days. And that was all 6 years ago this week. Actually, 6 years ago today is when I came out of the coma. So that's kind of why I'm recording this. So I still remember what it was like being in the coma. It was like this purplish, dark world. It was very small. couldn't see like the horizon. It was a cloud. It was weird. I was on a lot of fentanyl too. They had me on a bunch of, I had severe brain trauma. So they had me on Seroquel, fentanyl for the pain because I had a fractured pelvis and fractured vertebrae in my neck. When I came out of the coma, I woke up to a neck brace, pelvic fixator sticking out of my waist, my midsection. My right leg was the darkest purple I've ever seen. Not to be too graphic, but both of my testes were the size of 24-ounce soda cans. I thought I was going to lose both of them and my leg. In fact, I told the surgeon as soon as I came conscious and took stock of what was going on, I said, just cut them off, just amputate it, let me get out of here. Wanting to get out of there would be a recurring situation. I would end up in my state tearing out my IV, tearing out, removing my oxygen and all that stuff. And I guess that's somewhat common for people with head trauma. I was in the ICU for 4 weeks. And then I was moved to a room, and I ended up staying in that room for another 2 months while I was trying to recover. I ended up with a permanent drop foot in my right foot, my right leg, nerve damage that won't heal by the time by the time it heals, I'll be dead, because it's like a centimeter a year, I think, that nerves heal. And the neck brace I had to have on for 90 days because they were worried that if it broke anymore, I would become fully paralyzed, because it was those C4 and C6 or whatever vertebrae that caused paralysis were the ones that were fractured. So eventually I get discharged because I didn't have insurance. So at 90 days they discharge me, and I go home with the pelvic fixator. Now going home, the whole time I'm in the hospital, my mom and stepdad, my adoptive mother, I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was 2.5 years old because I was physically abused as an infant, taken out of the home, put in foster care, and then the adoption records were sealed, so I'll never know any of my blood family. I'll never be able to look at another person and be like, oh, there's part of me in you, which sucks. But I didn't realize it at the time, but let's just say the adoptive parents that I ended up with weren't the best. Of course, I'll get into that later, because this is kind of a story about how getting hit by a truck saved my life. But anyway, so the friend that had told me to move back from Vegas, he felt guilty because he knew I wouldn't be back in Florida had it not been for his coercion or promises. So he talked my parents into giving him money to get a house, to rent a house. And it ended up being money that had come out of my settlement. I ended up with the guy that hit us didn't have insurance, but the truck that hit us, even though it wasn't his fault, his insurance ended up covering. I know my medical bills were over $300,000, and I think I got around $10,000 as a settlement. Most of that went to getting the house, pain medication for the couple months that I was on it, and then I ended up buying a van, which is part of the story we're getting to. So the friend, quote unquote, I really hate to call him that because he did me dirty, but he ended up getting this house, and then he moved me in. Now, mind you, I'm in a wheelchair. I can't move my right leg. I'm still in shock because I haven't had any real time to process any of this. And my mom and stepdad had basically been like, well, you better figure something out because we don't have room for you. Now, mind you, they live in a 3-2 in a gated community out in the villages in Florida. They have plenty of room. They just didn't want to be burdened with a cripple because it would impede on their retirement lifestyle. But I felt like such a worthless piece of crap at this time that I didn't think anything of it. I just accepted that as being the way it was supposed to be, which was a pattern that I would later come to discover. But anyway, so I'm stuck in bed. They finally take the pelvic fixator out at 120 days. So 4 months after the accident, they remove the fixator and they leave the pins in. The pins become infected. I'm back at the house, upstairs in a room. I can't go to the bathroom. I have to use a hospital portable toilet. It's just a bad situation. I'm starting to get more and more in constant pain. I would get to the point where if I moved my right foot even slightly, from going from my leg being bent to straightening it out, that friction would cause me to be in agony within 45 minutes. My right leg would double in size of the left one. I would bring this up to my friend and my mom and my stepdad. They would make nothing of it, so I just figured, okay, I guess this is the way my life is going to be now. I had no idea. Obviously, I don't have a medical background, so I did not know what was going on with me. I just figured I was in a really bad accident. My life is going to suck for the rest of my life now. Turns out I had an infection where they had left the pins in. And it would get to the point where I would be screaming in agony multiple times a day. My friend was in control of my pain medication. So no matter how much pain I was in, it would be 4 hours and I would get one little Percocet, and that was supposed to be okay. So this went on for over a month of me in mind-blowing pain. Gripping the side of the bed rails that I was in, screaming, and he would just tell me, oh, that's your brain making it up because it wants more drugs, which is absolutely ridiculous in hindsight. But he would come from an AA background, and the old-timers in AA will teach you things like, oh, well, your brain will just create phantom stuff because it wants to get high, not validating any of the pain that I was actually feeling. So finally, I had a blister on my midsection that I had peeled one day, and it would not stop bleeding. For like a day and a half, it was just pouring blood. Turns out it was blood that was keep making my leg swell up in size the way it had. And it was from the infection not allowing it to circulate back up. So I was pale, but I figured that was because I'd been indoors for months. And I was weak, but I just figured that was because I was injured. So by the time I actually called an ambulance, after my friend called me a little bitch for doing so, he's like, yeah, if you want to be a little bitch about it, you can call an ambulance. Finally called an ambulance because I was scared and nobody else was going to do anything for me. So when I got in the ambulance, the paramedic was running blood tests on me, and I remember his face like going pale. And he said, we're going to have to redirect you to a different hospital. We're not equipped to handle. And I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. He had given me a shot for the pain. So I was starting to mellow out. I wasn't sweating, anyway. So it turned out that I was septic, and my hemoglobin was at a 3. Now, mind you, it's supposed to be at an 8. That means I had 5 bags worth of blood stored up in my right leg. So they get me back to Halifax in Daytona, and I went through a couple surgeries for them to analyze the infection. I still have a 9-inch scar on my side going from my rib cage down to my groin from where they cut me open. And it's a weird feeling to have a surgeon be able to reach his entire hand inside your body. And he's like, yeah, I could play around with it behind your stomach if I wanted to. Like it was wide open. But the surgeon came to me one day in the hospital room. Now, mind you, my family wasn't visiting. My friend wasn't present. I was in the hospital alone. And he came up to me. He's like, yeah, this infection's really bad. Sepsis is really bad. We've thrown every antibiotic we have in the hospital except for one, and it's one that we reserve because it's very strong and it has side effects. We're going to try this, and if this doesn't work, I need you to know that you're going to be dead within a couple days. So you need to make your peace with that. And as I sat there realizing that my family did not care if I died, honestly, looking back, my mom would have found it a relief because she wouldn't have to deal with me, struggling to survive and struggling to make ends meet and struggling to understand why I was the way I was, which had been an ongoing problem in my adult life. Realizing that nobody cared, that my existence could just be wiped out and everybody else in the world would go on with their day just like nothing had happened. It's kind of the reason I'm doing this YouTube channel now, because I want there to be something of me left on this world when I do eventually die. Anyway, 7 surgeries later, the infection was gone. I was started to heal. I had a wound vac hanging off of my side. Now, before I get the wound vac, there was one time they had put an entire roll of gauze after the last surgery. They cut out a whole bunch of muscle tissue, my adductor and abductor muscle. And so they packed in a whole bunch of gauze. Well, they didn't debride it over the weekend, which is where you spray solution on it to keep it from keep it from adhering. So when they went to remove the gauze, the pain was unbelievable. I thought the pain that I had experienced through the infection was bad. No, this was the most acute pain I've ever. Imagine having your muscle ripped centimeter by centimeter and being fully conscious for it. They gave me a shot of Dilaudid that did absolutely nothing to remove any of the pain. So anyway, that wound vac, I get discharged at 64 days, and I'm back at the house, back in the upstairs room where I can't go downstairs, I can't get to the bathroom. I'm now having to make sure that I stay sterile. And within a couple weeks, the friend and his girlfriend, he had a girlfriend that was living there and she was pregnant. And she had just had the baby. And they get in a fight. Now, I'm in the room, locked in the room. I'm not in the hallway where they're having the fight, but I can hear them through the walls. And I don't know what to do. Like, the old me was a very physical, very aggressive person. I was a sharp for most of my adult life. That's a skinhead against racial prejudice. So I was used to being able to handle myself physically and not being scared of any sort of altercation or aggressive behavior. So this was a completely new experience for me to not be able to intervene and calm things down. Like, I was so crippled that I was scared for my safety, and I was scared for my anyway. So they end up calling the police, and she ends up going to jail, not him, which was odd. And she ends up in jail for a couple weeks. Now, while she's in jail, he goes and empties her bank account, smokes crack in the room next to me with the baby, loses the job that he had just got set up. It was an online gig where he was working from home. It was a great gig for him. Loses that because he's, I guess, too high to do the job. But from what I was told later by his girlfriend, he ended up going through like $700 worth of crack in about a week. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was, like I said, stuck bedridden, essentially. But all of this leads to the owner of the house coming and saying, you all have to go. Now, he didn't tell me, he told Mark. And then Mark convinced me to loan him my share of the rent for that month, knowing full well that we didn't have to pay rent. He convinced me to give him my share of the rent, which I think was like $350 or something like that. He used that as a down payment on a car, packed up the car, and was gone. And on his way out was basically like, oh, hey, we have to be out of here in 3 weeks. So I had nowhere to go. My family did not care, which broke my brain. That's part of what sent me into a nervous breakdown later on, a couple years later. Well, not a couple years, that started the nervous breakdown. But so now I'm looking at living in the woods again, only now I'm in a wheelchair with a wound vac, with a wound that I have to keep sterile because I've just had a horrible scare of what will happen if I become infected. I will die. My immune system will not fight it off the next time. My family, perfectly content seeing me have to live in a tent in the woods in my condition, refused to offer any sort of compassion or empathy for my pain or my fear, my anxiety, which at the time I just accepted because I was so used to being made to feel like I was worthless by my mother that, and I looked up to her. I thought she was an angel at the time. I had been so manipulated my entire life to think that hers was the standard I was always trying to live up to. So I went on Facebook Marketplace, found a Ford Freestar minivan, and I was like, well, it's a metal tent, essentially. I can lock up my possessions in it, and at least that gives me a step in one direction to where I can buy some time to figure stuff out. Now, one thing you don't realize when you're getting into van life, if you haven't talked to anybody that's in it, is that you're going to have to constantly be moving. You're going to have gas. You can only normally be in a parking lot for about 4 hours before somebody comes and knocks on your door. I was so weak at the time that I couldn't get to restrooms, so I was having to pee in bottles and stuff like that. Oh, excuse me. And I was having to steal bandages from the Dollar General just to make sure that I could keep my wound sterile when even with the wound vac, having to get the tape and all that stuff. So I'm in the Walmart parking lot for about a week, and my mom and stepdad come driving up next to me, and they say, hey, you should go stay at your dad's house. Now, me and my dad hadn't gotten along for years. He emotionally abused the hell out of me. It was a bad situation, and I hadn't talked to him in years. This is the house that I grew up in as well, and this is also in Ocala. It was right down the street, actually, from that Walmart. He lived there with his girlfriend. Him and his girlfriend had been together for 10 years. When him and my mom got divorced, my mom met Chris, my stepdad, and he met Deborah, the girlfriend. And I didn't want to. Obviously, I had a lot of trauma with him. I did not get along with him, but then they told me that he had dementia and that they'd had to call a silver alert on him twice because he had disappeared, and they had to call the police to go and find him. And now all this was news to me. I had no idea that he had dementia. I especially did not know that he was this far into it. And that was a shock on top of the trauma that I was already dealing with from being crippled, being homeless, living in a van, having no idea what I was going to do with the future of my life, because I went from having the ability to work and having the ability to create whatever future I wanted to experience to completely being powerless. So eventually I was like, all right, I'll go over there. So I was living there. When we got there, my mom and stepdad had to go with me because he didn't recognize me. I had to show him my driver's license to prove to him that I was his son. And mind you, I'm still in shock from the accident, still in shock from the infection, still in shock from being homeless. Now I'm in shock from the fact that my dad doesn't recognize me as his son and is actively dying. So I park in his yard, and I'm there for, I'm there for a couple weeks when I take whatever's left of the settlement money and I buy solar panels and a solar setup, batteries and everything for the van that I'm living in. So I'm like, screw it. If this is going to be my future, I'm going to make the best of it. And I'm going to make my own power supply, whatever. So while I'm still in a wheelchair, the panels arrive. I build a rig to mount them to the roof of the van. I don't do a very good job, obviously, because I don't have any clue what I'm doing. Ends up leaking, but that's another story. So I get everything set up, and meanwhile, me and my dad are kind of making amends. Like we're mending the bridge. Without him actively recognizing me as his son, I'm still able to see a side of him that I'd never seen before, probably because he didn't recognize me. He was actually nice to me. And I got to see a side of him that made a lot of healing take place. So I am very grateful for the fact that that was the path my life took, because had he died and I never got to have that closure, I would have, I was still, now looking back, had I gotten a proper diagnosis, I'm sure he would have been a lot kinder to me, because he would have realized a lot of the things that he used to ridicule me and insult me for were things that weren't my fault. But that's, that's nothing can be done about that. So I'm living there, and his girlfriend is constantly asking me if I know where Will is, and if he had made arrangements for her to get the property, which was a 3-2 house on 2.5 acres in Southwest SoCal. It was worth about 300 something grand, and I was supposed to get an annuity that he had in my name with Prudential that was for 300 grand. And at the time, I was not really realizing how treacherous people can be. Turns out, I'll go ahead and tell you now, I'm autistic. I have ADHD and CPTSD stemming from the abuse that I was told I didn't suffer anything from because I didn't remember it. So my whole life I went through just being weird and not understanding why. And it turns out it was the very obvious abuse that I had suffered when I was a baby, that everybody just wrote off and dismissed. It turns out it had a very, very significant impact on my life. But as I'm staying there, Deborah, the girlfriend, is coming out to me, and she's making these statements about how she's got schizophrenia, and she hears voices, and do I ever want to hurt people in the middle of the night? And she's freaking me out. She's scaring me deliberately, in hindsight. So once I get the panels on, it's the middle of December. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take off. I'm going to drive back to Vegas because I had friends out there. Maybe I can find some remnant of the last bit of stability that I had, and I can reconnect with that, and I can try to start putting my life back together. I've got to get away from this. There's so many memories on this property, so much pain and all this going on, and my family isn't willing to offer any kind of real support. So let me try to go out to the last place that I was comfortable and that I had some stability, and see if I can rebuild from there. So I pack the van up, I say goodbye to my dad, and as soon as I'm down the street, she goes up to the courthouse with him. Mind you, he's 3 months away from dying of dementia, and gets him to sign over power of attorney, and she steals the annuity. She puts it in her name. So I'm out in Vegas for about a month, and I'm calling every day to check on my dad, and they stop answering the phone at a certain point. And I'm calling my mom. She's not answering the phone all of a sudden. I'm floundering. This is when gas prices were through the roof. I think it was like $6 something a gallon for gas. So I can't even drive anywhere in Vegas. I'm just basically living in a parking lot, an empty lot up there. And then finally, I get them on the phone, and they're like, "Oh, your daddy's with Jesus now." And I'm like, nobody cares how I'm processing this or how I'm handling this information. They just, "Oh, your daddy's with Jesus. Okay, bye." All right. I'm out here completely alone, body completely broken, mind gone, and nobody to even talk to process these feelings that I'm feeling. And so I get on the phone, I call Prudential, and they're like, "Yeah, we because I had called before to verify the annuity, and I could have gone down and gotten the power of attorney put in my name, but I was so broken at the time and in so much pain. The idea of even going into the courthouse scared the shit out. It intimidated me, overwhelmed me. Turns out a lot of that is the ADHD and autism, but I didn't know I had it at the time, so I wasn't able to consciously overcome it. So fast forward, I get a loan for the gas money to get back to Florida. I get back, and I've lost everything, and I'm staying in the front yard of this girl that was a bartender at this bar, O'Malley's, that I always used to go to, and my van breaks down. It won't start. It'll crank, but it won't turn over. It turns out, after I replaced the fuel injectors, after I checked the fuel pump, after I did a bunch of like stuff that I had to YouTube because I had no idea how to diagnose. I have to learn everything as it happens because I'm not a mechanic. I am a pretty decent one now, but that's only out of necessity. So it turned out to be an inertia dampening sensor from when I had slammed the hatchback back door. I had slammed it too hard. It triggered the sensor, shuts off the fuel pump. I didn't know that that was a thing, so I wasn't able to. It was just a button in the back. Would have been able to push it and fixed. Would have been an easy 2-second fix. But because I tried to crank the engine so many times in my process of repairing it, something in the gear of the starter had sheared off inside the motor. So by the time her roommate, the bartender's roommate, came out and said, "Dude, you've got to go. I didn't agree to have you living in my yard. I don't know what's going on. You can't be here." Which at that point was just basically the story of my life. I went for years not being allowed to exist anywhere. I finally am in a place where I have been allowed to exist on this property for over a year, and it's been a godsend. But before this, it was literally year after year of me not being allowed to just exist in the world. So I get the van started. Fortunately, it was the day that I had figured out what was wrong with it. And I drive it about a mile down the street to the Harbor Freight, which is by the Publix over on Highway 40. And van dies for the last time. Like it was grinding and making horrible noises. Just getting it there was at half power. So I lived in the Harbor Freight parking lot for about a week. During this time, I called a friend of mine who was a nurse. I'd known her for years, and I was like, "I need you to help me get bank corrected. I need a place to like put my stuff while I go and try to get treatment because I'm suicidal. I don't know how to function. I don't know how to live. I don't know how to get up each day and keep going. I need help." And she was like, "Oh, you'll be fine." She just completely dismissed anything that I was going through because she was so used to just basically writing me off that this was just another example of me exaggerating things for attention, I guess. Not bothering to look at my living situation and my circumstances and be like, "Oh, wow, he might actually be struggling here." And because I was so used to having my pain dismissed, I was just like, "Okay, well, I guess I'll figure something out. Okay, thanks, bye." Had I actually gotten Baker Act at that time, I would have gotten diagnosed 2.5 or so years earlier. Could have avoided so much pain. But because nobody took me seriously, just like with the pain from the infection, it's like so many things that nobody bothered to take my pain seriously, and so therefore I just continued to suffer because I wasn't able to take my own pain seriously. And a lot of that will stem from the trauma responses I developed as an infant, because you got to figure as a baby I was ripped away from my family, had my entire world taken away from me, so I became what they call a people pleaser. And so making sure people kept me around and didn't write me off or didn't discard me became more important than my actual well-being. And so when this nurse, this medical professional, was telling me that I didn't really have a problem, she's like, "Okay, well, I guess that's it. I guess that's the truth. Maybe I am just stupid." So anyway, I get the van towed to this parking lot that was used to be a bike path over in Bellevue Santos, and it hadn't been in use for years. So it was just this empty parking lot. People would go there like on their lunch breaks to smoke weed or something like that. So I was parked there for about a week, and I was going on Facebook trying to find another vehicle. I didn't have any money, but I had another check coming from my dad's estate. I guess one that his girlfriend didn't know about, and I knew I was going to have about $6 or $7 grand coming in. So I'm living there, and cops have come. They told me I can't be there. I've got like 2 days to get gone. Got a van that's full of crap that I had accumulated, like a twin mattress and a bed frame that I had to cut the feet off of because the floor in the van was sloped. So anyway, and the solar panels on the roof, 320-pound batteries, AGM batteries, 200 amp hour batteries. And finally I find the van that I'm living in now on Facebook. And it was a camper van. It was titled as an RV, has a sink, has a bed built into it, had a mini fridge and an AC unit. I've since ripped both of those out, and I have another mini fridge that's a lot more energy efficient. But I ended up getting my mom to give me a loan because they realized I had money coming in, so it was of no risk to them. And I think they kind of realized that with the situation I was in, if they didn't help me financially, then they were going to kind of have to let me live with them on their couch, because otherwise there's no way they could justify or pretend to be good people. Because I was going to end up in jail and lose everything that I built up, and I was still in constant pain because I hadn't rebuilt the muscle tissue in my leg yet. I'd had complete muscle atrophy in my right leg from years of non-use. Like I literally had to pick my leg up with my hand and move it. Driving the van, I had to punch a hole in a shoe that I had, a slip-on shoe, attach a piece of paracord to it, and I would lift the paracord up to lift my foot up so that I could apply it to the gas pedal, and then I would brake with my left foot. And I did that for a year. Like the whole drive out to Vegas and back, that was how I drove, because I did not have adductor muscles to lift my leg up at the hip. So anyway, I get the van, I get it titled, and then years down, like a couple years or a year down the road, I would finally, because of the Medicare that I had through the disability, I would be able to get diagnosed. And that's when I learned about all of the trauma and all of the trauma responses and the ADHD and how dopamine affects emotional regulation, and how, like, literally as soon as I started learning about it, which is what's so frustrating in hindsight, is that the answers were out there the entire time, but because nobody would take me seriously, I never did the research, because I didn't take my own pain seriously. But every time, like I went to this one channel on YouTube called How to ADHD. That was amazing. What triggered the whole thing was an Andrew Huberman video about dopamine and how it affects other parts of the brain, and how ADHD isn't a lack of production, it's a lack of receptors. And I was like, literally, I bawled for 4 days, because everything that I saw resonated. Everything was an exact explanation of what I've been dealing with my entire life. Like, I was suicidal when I was 13. When I was in middle school, I tried to cut my wrists, got Baker acted, and got diagnosed as manic depressive, because that was when Nirvana was popular, and manic depression was the go-to diagnosis for all psychiatrists. Turns out it was my ADHD. I was suicidal because my brain had stopped working. I'd been an A student up until about 8th grade, and then I just couldn't function anymore, and I didn't understand why. And it was a cry for attention, but it was a legitimate cry for attention. It was a cry for help. And everybody wrote it off as, oh, he'll grow out of it when he goes through puberty. And because the professional had told my parents that I was attention seeking and would grow out of it, from that point forward, they dismissed me. And when I realized I was no longer getting love or support from my parents, that's when I began to start masking. Now, masking got so bad that I couldn't even stop masking when I was home alone. Like, I didn't know I was doing it, so I didn't know how to quit. I would constantly wonder if this is how other people became the people they were, if this was normal. Is it normal to act like a character? And then it became to the point where that character was able to deflect pain and trauma because it happened to the person I was portraying, not the real me underneath inside. But the problem with that is that I didn't process or grow from any of that trauma. I just compartmentalized it, locked it up, and it would all come back when I got diagnosed. It would come back hard. My abandonment issues from the abuse and adoption, the trauma of a lot of the stuff that I had experienced, because I would always push things to the extreme, not realizing I was doing that just to get a dopamine rush. Like, I've been attacked with a machete, I've seen my best friend decapitated, and all these things I basically just immediately put up a wall, put it away, locked it away, and did not process it. So when I finally realized all of these things were valid and all of these things were genuine and authentic and had happened to me, it hit me hard. And I was living in a parking lot at the Cracker Barrel. I was living in their parking lot in a broken down van because the bolt that holds my tensioner pulley had snapped off when my alternator had gone out. My alternator froze up, caused the belt to snap the tensioner pulley instead of snapping the belt. And so I was in their parking lot for 7.5 months trying to fix it. And this is while I was going through the diagnosis process, while I was dealing with all this. So I'll go into another time about what that did to create the permanent rift between my mom, my stepdad, and I, because once I realized that my pain was valid, I realized that they had been absolute monsters during the time of my recovery after the accident. Wasn't mad about, how I'd been treated as a kid. I told her literally we were all doing the best we could with the tools we had at the time. But the way that they had dismissed me after the accident, when there was no way they could ignore the pain I was in, that was unforgivable, in my opinion. You don't treat family like that. You don't treat a stray dog like that. And they had no problem just writing me off and making whatever mental gymnastic excuses they had to in their own head still feel like good people. And that goes into another story. But for now, the point of all this is that not getting diagnosed and not having my pain validated when I was younger caused me to live in a lifetime of dismissing my own suffering and struggle. And that's why I still live in a van. Like, I'm still I still socially isolate. Now that I no longer mask, socializing is very difficult. I've learned about, I'm level 1 autistic. I'm high functioning, but that doesn't change the fact that like small talk and eye contact and forming a connection and not seeing the manipulation tactics. And I went for years thinking that all friendships were transactional, not realizing that altruistic friendships existed. And all of this was because of the way I was raised and the behaviors that I was taught to normalize as a child. I've been on my own since I was 15, essentially. Like I was emancipated when I was 16 so that I could go to college. I ended up dropping out of college after one semester because of the ADHD I didn't know I had, made it impossible for me to remember the things that I had studied. And but anyway, so that's why I live in a van. That's why I'm the van punk. It turns out if you have undiagnosed ADHD, you're much more likely to get into punk rock because of the rebellious nature of it and the short, energetic bursts, the dopamine rush that the music provides and the lifestyle and the pushing things to extremes. And now I have been living in this van for, I want to say 4 years. I've been living with my kitty cat Willow for 3. She's outside right now. I got her while I was living in the parking lot at the Cracker Barrel, but I'll tell that story another time. But anyway, if you're still here and still haven't clicked off, thank you for listening. This is the first time that I've actually talked to the camera on my channel, so hopefully this isn't too embarrassing. And if anybody out there can take anything away from this, it's get yourself checked out. If you feel like you're struggling, if you feel like you're different, if you feel like things are going on that nobody else around you is going to validate, there is an answer out there. Just keep looking. And I promise you the knowledge and the information can change your life. Like I will never be suicidal again because now I know that I'm not just fundamentally broken. There is a name for what was wrong with me. And I hate to say wrong, what was different about me, what makes me neurodivergent. The whole reason I was suicidal was because I just felt broken my entire life because I didn't know it had a name. And now that I know it has a name, I don't have to celebrate it, but I at least know how to work around it. I at least know how to adapt to it. I at least know how to incorporate it into who I am. And I wouldn't have learned any of that had I not gone through the accident and gone through the pain and had to watch people dismiss what was very clear, obvious suffering in order to say, okay, well, maybe this has been going on a lot longer than I realize. Maybe I have to start taking my own pain seriously because God knows nobody else is going to. And when I did that, I was finally able to say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me. And fortunately, just by some stroke of luck, that Andrew Huberman video popped up on my feed on YouTube, and I watched it, and that really set the entire ball rolling. Real quick, there's another great channel for anybody suffering with CPTSD called Crappy Childhood Fairy. She is amazing when it comes to learning techniques to adapt and incorporate and overcome trauma and trauma responses. Like I said, there's How to ADHD, which is a great channel. I will link all of these in the description, or in the description. And then there's another channel that helped me a ton, which was Boze versus the World, BOZE versus the World. She talks about how to deal with people that are like narcissists, have certain personality disorders, and how they manipulate and try to control and take power in relationships. And once I started realizing that most of those were being checked off by my mom, I was able to start recognizing the fact that I had been manipulated and had been used as little more than a source of validation my entire life. It wasn't about my well-being, it was just about how long I kept validating her. And as soon as I no longer offered that validation, the mask, her mask dropped, and she became a horrible person. And she will unfortunately die a horrible person because she's in her 80s. And she will not accept any criticism that could lead to growth. That's the one thing that I learned through all of this, is that growth is painful. Learning is painful. But through that pain comes forgiveness. And the ability to forgive myself for a lot of the things that I had just written myself off for most of my life was one of the most important and beneficial things that I think anybody can ever experience. So again, thanks for listening. Hope you all are well, and I'll talk to you again later.